Welcome back to your channel, Stories and Lessons, where ancient tales come to life. Today, we have a magical adventure that will take you to strange lands and worlds you've never seen before. But before we begin our journey, we'd love to get to know our wonderful family around the world. Write to us in the comments from which country you are watching us and what time it is now in your city. In a small village, forgotten by rain for years, lived Salem, a poor farmer whose fertile land had turned into dry dust and hard stones. 3 lean years had passed, and the sky withheld its tears. So the fields died, the trees withered, and hearts grew heavy with despair and fear. Salem sat every day in front of his barren land, looking at the cracked soil that was once his source of livelihood and pride. Only a little dry bread remained in his house, and the silence of hunger filled the corners of the dilapidated home day and night. The drought spread throughout the village like a plague. Wells dried up, livestock dwindled, and obtaining a loaf of bread became a daily battle. Everyone suffered, but Salem's solitude and helplessness made his calamity even more severe and a heavier burden on his shoulders. Debts piled up on the poor farmer until he owed the greedy grain merchant an amount he could never repay, even if he worked his entire life. The merchant was merciless, his eyes gleaming with avarice whenever he passed by Salem's land, which he coveted. One morning, the merchant stood with his heavy shadow at Salem's door, demanding money in a loud voice that all the neighbors heard. He threatened to seize the house and land by tomorrow's sunset if the debt wasn't paid in full, his threat as sharp as a sword. The world darkened in Salem's eyes. He sat alone, contemplating his unknown fate and how he would sleep exposed without shelter. As he was lost in his worries, a strange-looking old man suddenly appeared, wearing ragged clothes and leaning on an ancient wooden staff. The elderly traveler asked for a drink of water and a piece of bread, his voice weak and trembling from exhaustion and long travel. Despite Salem's extreme poverty, he did not hesitate for a moment. He brought out the last loaf he owned, divided it in half, and offered the old man cold water with a smile. The old man ate and thanked Salem, his eyes gleaming with a mysterious sparkle. Then he pulled a small cloth pouch from his pocket, its strings tightly bound. The old man said in a deep voice, "Your generosity will not be in vain. Take these seeds. They are not like any seeds you've seen before." Salem opened the pouch with trembling hands and found 3 golden seeds twinkling in the sunlight as if tiny stars had fallen from the sky. He marveled at their shape and warm feel, looking at the old man with surprise, awaiting an explanation for this wondrous treasure. The old man leaned close to Salem's ear and whispered a dangerous secret. "Plant them tonight because the moon is full and your life will change forever." He warned him not to tell anyone about them and said that the land you watered with the sincerity of your generosity would sprout something beyond human imagination. Salem tried to ask more questions, but when he looked up, the spot was completely empty, and the old man had vanished as if he had never been there. He searched for him right and left on the road, but his footsteps had vanished with the wind, and the 3 seeds remained in his hand. Salem went out to the middle of his barren land, his heart pounding with hope and fear. He dug 3 small holes in the dry soil and carefully placed the golden seeds, as if entrusting his soul to them. He covered the seeds with soil, watered them with the last drops of water in his jug, and then sat beside them, praying to God that they would be the cause of his salvation. Exhaustion and worry overcame him, and he fell asleep beside the hole, with the soil as his pillow, dreaming of the merchant and his debts. In the middle of the night, the ground began to gently shake beneath Salem's sleeping body, and a faint sound, like rocks breaking, emerged. The soil cracked open, and a gleaming green stalk emerged, growing at an astonishing speed, climbing into the air and powerfully twisting around itself. The plant continued to ascend towards the moon, growing thicker and taller with each passing minute, until its shadow covered the entire area. Salem did not wake. He was deeply asleep while the miracle unfolded beside him in silence and at incredible speed. As dawn broke, Salem opened his eyes to find a colossal shadow blocking the sunlight from his face and his small house. He slowly raised his gaze, and the blood froze in his veins at the sight before him, as if he were still in a dream world. There was a giant tree, its trunk as thick as a tall tower, its branches extending to pierce the clouds and disappear into the highest heavens. Its leaves were massive and green, gleaming like emeralds, and its powerful roots plunged deep into the earth like firm mountain stakes. The villagers gathered around Salem's house, their tongues tied by astonishment as they gazed at the green giant. Whispers began to circulate among them. Some thought it a divine miracle, while others recoiled in fear, believing it to be cursed black magic. The merchant shouted from the crowd, accusing Salem of sorcery and inciting the people to uproot the tree before it brought them calamities. Salem stood before the tree trunk, protecting it with his frail body, and cried out that it was a gift from a righteous man and a blessing from God. Salem looked up to where the tree's summit disappeared among the clouds and felt a strange call in his soul, urging him to ascend. He said in a firm voice that everyone heard, "I will climb to see where this tree ends, for perhaps salvation lies there in the sky." Salem began to climb the massive trunk, using the thick branches as a natural ladder that lifted him from the misery of the earth. Eyes watched him from below as he grew smaller and smaller until he became a tiny speck slowly moving towards the dense white clouds. Many long hours passed, and Salem climbed without stopping, his muscles screaming from pain and his breath panting from effort and fatigue. Whenever he looked down, he saw his village receding and shrinking until its features completely disappeared, and he was suspended between sky and earth. Salem entered the cold white cloud layer, where humidity dampened his clothes and fog obscured his vision around him. He felt awe and fear of the unknown, but the old man's voice in his memory urged him to continue and never look back. Suddenly, Salem pierced through the cloud and found himself under an incredibly bright sun and a clear blue sky. Before him, he saw solid ground extending above the clouds, covered in astonishing greenery and colors he had never witnessed in his miserable life on Earth. Salem jumped from the last branch onto this new land, standing astonished, contemplating the strange world he had reached. Everything here was terrifyingly huge. Trees like towers, flowers the size of tents, and rocks like fortified castles. Salem realized he had entered a different world and whispered to himself in a trembling voice, "I am in the land of giants, where everything defies imagination." He walked with extreme caution, looking around warily, fearing that a monstrous beast or giant creature might appear and crush him underfoot. He hid behind a rock the size of a small house, watching the path ahead and trying to understand the nature of this magical place. He heard distant sounds resembling muffled thunder, as if they were giants' laughter or the clanging of huge pots preparing for a massive feast. He saw vast fields of wheat, but the ears of grain rose like towering palm trees, swaying in the wind with a strong sound. A butterfly the size of a large door passed before him, fluttering its colorful wings, and he held his breath until it flew away and vanished into the horizon. He continued his journey until he reached a wide waterway that gleamed like silver, flowing over accumulated clouds as if it were a magical river. The water flowed with a sweet, musical sound, but the size of the splashing droplets was enough to drown a small man like him. Salem carefully crossed the river, jumping over enormous smooth stones the size of windmills, with the danger of slipping threatening him with death. He reached the other bank exhausted, and there he saw something that made him freeze in place, his blood turning to ice with fear. He found remnants of torn human clothing and a small white bone lying beside a rock, as if someone had preceded him here and not survived. He realized the terrifying truth. I am not the first to climb this tree, but it seems greed has destroyed those who came before me. Salem trembled and said to himself, I must be careful, for the land here shows no mercy to the weak and forgives no reckless ones. Suddenly, he heard a loud snore like the roar of storms, so he crawled on his belly very slowly towards the source of the terrifying sound. He saw a giant sleeping near a vast farm, his body stretching like a massive hill, his chest rising and falling with each breath like a cyclone. Salem crept between piles of straw that were the size of small hills, almost falling under the shadow of the colossal giant's foot. He approached a giant wooden barn that exuded a smell of straw mixed with a strange scent resembling old gold. He looked through a crack in the wood and saw a goose the size of a cow, its feathers gleaming as if cast from pure gold. He watched the goose lay a large golden egg, which rolled onto the straw with a mesmerizing gleam. The devil whispered to him at that moment, "Take just one egg. It's enough to pay all your debts and secure your life forever." Greed overcame fear for a moment, and Salem snuck into the barn, his heart beating like rapidly drumming war drums. He approached the egg and lifted it with great difficulty. It was very heavy. He placed it in his cloth bag, trembling. He quickly returned to hide behind the hay bale, breathing heavily, his eyes fixed on the sleeping giant, fearing his sudden awakening. Suddenly, the snoring stopped, and the giant stirred in his sleep, the ground shaking under his heavy movement as if an earthquake was striking the place. The giant opened his eye, sniffed the air with his massive nose, then roared in a deep voice, "I smell a little human here." Salem, terrified, crawled towards a giant mouse hole, which was the size of a dark cave, and hid deep inside, trembling with fright. The giant began searching the place, uprooting entire bushes with his hand and crushing rocks with his foot, looking for the source of the intrusive smell. Salem heard the sound of destruction above his head and prayed to God to save him from this predicament he had brought upon himself. He heard the giant muttering angrily as he moved away. "It must be another thief like the one before. Greed always brings them to their demise." Salem then realized that the fate of those who preceded him was death under the feet of this monster, so he vowed to be cautious. Salem waited a long time until silence prevailed and the giant returned to sleep. Then he emerged from the hole with extreme caution, dusting himself off. He said to himself in a whisper, "One egg is enough for my salvation. I don't want more, and I don't want the curse of greed to strike me." But night began to fall in the land of the giants, and Salem saw the giant rise and enter a legendary stone palace in the distance. A strange curiosity and a hidden force pushed him to approach the palace, even though his mind was screaming at him to escape and return. Salem snuck between the towering stone columns, which were like gigantic mountains, and entered the palace through a small crack in the lower wall. He found himself in an endless, vast hall filled with treasures and jewels of fantastical sizes, beyond description and imagination. There were piles of gold coins the size of shields and diamond-studded crowns gleaming under the light of colossal torches. Salem resisted his urge to touch the gold and repeated to himself, "I will only take what I need, just a little." He picked up a small handful of scattered gold flakes from the floor and carefully put them in his pocket. They were heavy, but a great fortune. In a corner of the hall, he saw a golden harp playing enchanting music by itself, and he recoiled, fearing it might make a sound that would expose him. He spotted the golden goose again, tied with a thin chain next to the giant's throne, looking at him with sad eyes. Greed whispered strongly in his ear again. "If you take her, you won't need anything ever again. You'll become the richest man in the world." Salem hesitated for a long time between the voice of reason that warned him and the voice of greed that made him more daring and reckless. The goose was only a few steps away, and the giant was busy eating on the other side, and the opportunity seemed perfect and very tempting. Finally, he extended his trembling hand and tried to undo the chain to drag the goose with him, ignoring all the surrounding danger signs. Suddenly, the goose opened its beak and let out a resounding cry that shook the palace's foundations, echoing everywhere. Salem froze in terror, immediately realizing he had made a fatal mistake that could cost him his life. He let go of the chain and retreated quickly, but the shriek had reached the giant's ears, who turned around in fierce anger. The giant sprang to his feet and roared with a voice like thunder. "Thief! There's a despicable thief who dares to enter my palace!" He began to run towards Salem with wide strides, each step shaking the ground and making the columns sway as if they would collapse. Salem ran at his maximum speed, leaving the goose behind, clinging only to his small bag and the handful of gold in his pocket. His heart pounded violently, almost bursting from his chest, and the sound of the giant's footsteps approached him like inevitable death. Salem reached the edge of the cloudland and saw the top of the tree looming before him like a lone lifesaver in this hell. He jumped towards the trunk and began to descend at a frenzied speed, heedless of his injured hands or torn clothes. The giant reached the edge and screamed in anger, then grasped the giant tree trunk with his powerful hands and began to shake it violently. The tree swayed strongly as if it would break, and Salem swung left and right, almost falling into the vast void. Salem looked up and saw the giant starting to descend behind him, his enormous hand breaking branches as if they were matchsticks. Salem increased his descent speed, sliding and jumping, the golden egg in his bag hitting his back and weighing him down. In a moment of terror, he remembered the bones of those who died before him because of greed, and understood that the burden he carried could be the cause of his demise. He said to himself, panting, "I will take nothing that threatens my life. Survival is more important than all the treasures of the world." He continued his frantic descent, seeing the ground slowly approaching, while the giant continued to cover him and block the light. The chase between sky and earth was a race against time. Every second in it was worth a whole lifetime. Salem finally reached the solid ground, falling exhausted, his breath coming in gasps, his body trembling from effort and fear. He looked up and saw the giant had covered half the distance, his size growing clearer and more terrifying with each moment. Salem realized that if the giant reached the ground, neither he nor his village nor anyone would survive his wrath and fury. He screamed at the top of his lungs, calling the villagers, "Help me! Bring axes! Death is coming from the sky!" The villagers rushed, terrified by his voice, and saw the horrifying sight of the giant descending, freezing for a moment in shock. Salem grabbed a large axe and struck the tree trunk with all his remaining strength, yelling at them to help him. The men moved, and axes began to rain down on the thick trunk. They struck with fear and despair as if fighting for their lives. The giant came closer and extended his long arm, trying to grab Salem before the tree was cut. The tree began to lean and emit a terrifying sound like a dying beast's moan, while the giant's screams filled the horizon with threats. The giant crashed to the ground with an impact that shook the village, and dust rose to cover the entire place. In a terrible moment of silence, the giant died, and with him, fear died. The magical tree's leaves scattered to cover his enormous corpse. Salem fell to his knees, panting, alive, and safe, but empty-handed of the gold and treasures he had seen. He looked around and saw his neighbors safe, and his land once again welcomed the sun after the shadow of the tree and the giant had vanished. He did not find the golden egg. It was lost in the chaos or stolen, but Salem did not care, nor look for it. He raised his head towards the clear sky and whispered words of thanks to God for the harsh lesson that saved his soul from perdition. Salem realized at that moment that whoever climbs the ladder of greed falls into the abyss of sin, and true wealth is the soundness of the heart. He returned to cultivating his land diligently and lived happily with what God provided him, telling his story as a lesson for generations. Thus ended the story of the sky tree. It brought Salem neither gold nor silver, but granted him wisdom more precious than the treasures of the earth. Contentment is an unfading treasure, and greed is a merciless destroyer. Whoever is content with what God has allotted him lives like a king. The village returned to its simple life, and rain began to fall again, irrigating the thirsty fields. Time erased the traces of the giant and the tree, but the lesson remained in people's hearts, always reminding them that salvation lies in contentment, not in greed. Every full moon night, Salem looks at the moon and smiles, remembering that night when he planted the seeds of greed and reaped the fruits of wisdom. He sleeps with a clear conscience, knowing that tomorrow's provision is in God's hands, and that is enough for him. Is there anything more beautiful than to sleep wronged but not a wrongdoer, and to wake up safe in one's home? This is the true wealth that no thief can steal, nor echo consume, which Salem finally found after his journey. The page of the giant tree closed, but its lesson echoed with every tale told around hearths on winter nights. The village slept in peace, and the stars guarded the dreams of the good. The story ended for a new wisdom to begin in life. See you in another story, another new lesson, and an endless journey of imagination, as long as there is a heartbeat in the heart and hope in the soul. Always remember that the sky does not rain gold, but it rains mercy on those who trust and endure.